as you heard the voice of a patient and you know that there's unity, as Dr. Arena said, the way we're going to do this together is with the patient, with industry sponsors, and with physicians and researchers. That is the way we're going to be able to cure cancer. We need it as a community, and no one better than Maria to bring a group of individuals like this today for this setting to be able to share these voices. So I'm going to just quickly introduce our speakers, and they're going to actually do a much better job in sharing what they do in their role in industry. So these are, we're getting from two key opinion leaders that work in industry um, on the pharmaceutical side, the biotech side, and then we're going to hear from a diagnostic company that has a test in CTDA. So it'll be interesting. You can please feel free to come to the podium and ask your questions. We're going to keep this very fluid, and I'm going to jump right in and introduce. We got Julie Fattaleh. She leads the efforts in breast cancer for diagnostic test, and she's going to speak about the company Natera and what the role is in partnerships with patient advocacy and the importance of these tests. And as you saw today, there's a lot of unanswered questions and things that still need to be done. But she leads those discussions with the physicians like Neil Igar and Hy Musk, Dr. Frank Arena, Dr. Theodoulou, to be able to pair and get those discussions moving along the pendulum so we can get tests like this in your hands to be able to navigate your care. I call it the roadmap. So then we have Deb Wafer, who is with Gilead. She is a community engagement advocacy leader with Gilead. And I told her she's a dual. She also is a clinician by background. She's a nurse by training. And I told her, once you're a nurse, you'll never stop being a nurse. And she is a cancer survivor, breast cancer survivor. So we get double dibs with her. So we can ask her questions about advocacy from a personal side of breast cancer and how she's navigated, but you can also ask questions around Gilead's role and how they reach patients and how do they reach research and integrate patients into research, right? Many of you may not be aware, but patients actually now, fast forward, we're talking about the advancement. Patients in any one of these organizations are involved in the clinical trials. They have a seat at the table. So they give input because it's so important. As they talked earlier about safety profiles and side effects. They're able, you all know, no one better can share, a patient advocate can share their experience or their feedback. And sometimes it's that trade-off. And you may pick a lower dose so that you can finish your treatment instead of being really sick just to get through that treatment, right? There are ways around this. And I think we've heard that today. So Julie, did you share a little bit about CTDA and kind of go into the vision? Because I think that's a hot topic right now.
Sure. I'm Julie Fattaleh. I'm the National Director for Breast Oncology for Natera. We make one of the ctDNA assays for minimal residual disease, or MRD, that was discussed earlier today, called Signatera. But what I'm here really to talk about today is really how Signatera or MRD assays like it are used today for patients, what resources are available through our company and potentially other companies, and a little bit about data behind those. Doctors Arena and Iyengar and Banwait and Theodoulou all really illustrated this morning how where we are with MRD, it has promise. I mean, you hear this phrase, if there were only blood tests, and we're, like Dr. Arena said, we might be right there. Natera has invested quite a bit, probably more than any other company. We were the first assay on the market. We've also invested the most in research behind these to really help understand, can we detect a recurrence and act on that and change the outcomes for patients. That hasn't been established yet, and that's the $64,000 question. Today, these tests are available and they're on the market, and they're useful as an additional tool. The results of the test can't be used on their own to make decisions. They have to be used in conjunction with all of the other standard ways physicians make decisions. But patients do find this test useful to them, and in some cases, and physicians find it useful in some cases. And we're still learning about how that works. In the meantime, we have data that shows, the value of a negative result on this test patients is very high. And the value of a positive result can be high, but it also can be um, challenging, because Dr. Van Wait talked about, he had a patient that turned positive, and he can't act on that positive result by itself. So he had a space of time between the time that result developed and potential recurrence. And physicians worry, they have an obligation not to create that anxiety for a patient. So there's a huge upside. The negative test result can relieve anxiety, and the positive test result can be useful in some cases in detecting recurrence early, but it also has that capability. So the important thing is, if there's an interest in this test, that it's a decision you make with your physician, knowing all of the potential benefits and all of the potential ways it can be challenging, and then determine whether that's right for you. The test can do a couple things in addition to detecting a recurrence. It can help for patients on therapy. It can help monitor the patient response to therapy. So we know that the levels of circulating tumor DNA going up or down correlates with response to treatment. The other thing it can do, if ordered or tested at certain time points in your journey, if it's ordered before treatment, we have some data that shows it can help understand your individual prognosis. And if it's ordered during treatment, at certain time points, those time points can be meaningful to help determine what your longer term outcomes would be. There are other types of ctDNA tests. We will have one eventually, but that Dr. Iyengar referred to, that can help understand changes in your cancer. So ctDNA can be, the test can be used in a lot of ways. Some of the things we offer patients are, we hear today many times about financial toxicity or cost. We at our company, and most companies in this space, have very good financial policies for patients. We try very hard to minimize the out-of-pocket, or if a patient's insurance doesn't pay for it, work with the patient. In most cases, you get no bill if your insurance doesn't cover it from Natera. If you have an out-of-pocket or a copay, that is, we work with you to minimize that. We have a very generous program for that. So we really try to make access available to everybody. And, I think what's really important to understand is that it's just an additional tool at this point. The other last thing I will say is we are just launched several clinical trials, one of which has 50 sites in the U.S., which will enable patients with hormone receptor positive cancer who qualify for a CDK4/6 inhibitor to enter the trial and delay or hold on initiation of that CDK4/6 inhibitor until they turn positive. And that the purpose of that study is to help us answer that question. If we treat on that molecular test result as opposed to waiting for a tumor to be visible on a scan. Will that change an outcome for a patient? And so we're working on those, but those, that's another option potentially for patient is to enter a clinical trial um, that's using ctDNA is part of the trial. So anyway,
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Um, all righty. Next, just love to hear a little bit more about the work you're doing in patient advocacy at Gilead and how you approach patients and your work, how you transitioned your work from being a nurse into patient advocacy.
Okay, is this on?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. I came from California here, and it was a trek.
And literally just got off the train.
Yeah, it was a trek. I had a Lucille Ball moment this morning. I didn't buy my Amtrak ticket ahead of time, and then when I got to the station, the train was full. So anyway, I felt like Lucy this morning. But thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here with everyone. I know there are patients, their families, and their support systems in the audience, and that is something that Gilead engages in all the time. I lead our community advocacy and engagement team, and what we do is we are the voice of the community and the patients at Gilead. So we want to make sure that the patient's voice is always in the room when we're having discussions about our medication, about our access, about our programs. My team's job is to make sure we bring that voice and make sure that that voice is in the table. I know how many of you know about Gilead Sciences. About Gilead Sciences, but we are a biotech company that's located in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we were founded during the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And as you know, advocacy was a big thing during HIV in the treatment, getting research done. And we really just stand on that. Were founded and we always engage patients and community when we're making our decisions about our treatment. And now we've expanded into oncology. And now that we're in oncology, we're bringing the lessons that we learned from HIV into the room. And we just did some trials, and what we want to do is make sure patients are always at the table. Someone talked about that earlier, but we want to make sure patients are at the table, not just to recruit for the clinical trials, but to answer any questions that patients might have about clinical trials. We have the questions that we want to answer through science, but while we're doing the studies, let's take a look at what patients want to know too. Things like for women might be about fertility. And are you going to take a look at that when you are doing these studies? So we make sure we bring that voice into the room. And we want to make sure that people understand science alone is not what's going to get us to the cure or what people need. Science is a piece of it, but we need to make sure patients are at the center of what we do. So a little bit about me. I was a nurse practitioner for many years at UCLA Medical Center, but before that, I worked in community health. So I've always been about the patient and the community, health equity, health literacy, and all of those things that I think are important when we're talking to patients. And then we can be authentic about what we're saying, and we are making sure we're using language that patients can understand, and we are providing the kind of services that patients can benefit from. So I think Gilead is one of the companies that's on the leading edge when it comes to advocacy and when it comes to community engagement and making sure that the patient's voices are in the room. TNBC or triple negative breast cancer is something that is a serious issue. It's a real serious issue for Black women. Black women are disproportionately impacted when it comes to TNBC, and young women are disproportionately impacted. So we make sure we have summits where we bring women, scientists, nurses, everyone together and have conversations about what we need to do moving forward. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Mary.
No, Deborah, don't go away. You said something that's really important. It's true, Black women are disproportionately affected by triple negative breast cancer. And yet, most of our clinical trials, as you know, if you look at the demographics, about less than 2% of patients who enter trials are Black.
Yeah.
And not that different of a number for Hispanics. What mission? Then I'll let you go. I promise. I don't want to put you on the spot. You're keying into what I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
What mission? What issues are you putting forward for those unmet needs? How to gather? How to educate neighborhoods? How to educate churches? How to educate different patient populations on either side of the river, in order for there to be more trust in the system and get more women to come on to clinical trials that are from underserved populations.
Right.
Did I steer you with that?
No, but it's a lot. So I want to break it down to several buckets here, because the reason I came into pharma was because that I was running not running, but I was one of the nurses at UCLA doing clinical research in HIV. And HIV scary for the Black community because it had been talked about as a disease for white gay men. And quite frankly, Black people thought, oh, that's one thing we don't have to worry about, and then it was like, oh, no, we do have to worry about it. And so I was doing clinical trials on pregnant women who were HIV positive. It's the first time they had trials where you could be a woman and be pregnant and get an experimental drug. And so, how many of you guys know about the Tuskegee study? Raise your hands. Okay, good. And so, because of that Tuskegee study, for those of you who don't know, this was a study where they studied men who had syphilis, and when they had treatment that would get rid of syphilis, they didn't treat these Black men. And so they followed the men to see how long did it take for them to get blind, how long did it take for them to do all these other things. And so there was a lot of suspicion in the Black community about clinical trials. People didn't know what clinical trials were, but they knew what Tuskegee was. And Tuskegee actually did some good things as well as bad things. One of the things that they did was IRBs were formed because of Tuskegee, institutional review boards, which was not something that didn't happen before. And so while I was doing that study, I, being from the community, was able to go back and talk to people, break the science down, and health literacy, medical trust, all of those things have to be addressed when you're talking about clinical trials. And then you need trusted voices. I think we learned from COVID, right? If you go to the churches, if you go to the bar shops, but you have to train people so that so it's a, what do I want to say? It's a bi-directional. Yeah, I'm saying with my hand, right? But it's a bi-directional conversation that's happening, because women who I saw in those HIV studies, they were like, I'm scared. What if this doesn't work? And I had to walk them through it. And so they needed someone that they could break verbs with. Didn't have to have perfect English. They didn't have to know all the science, but they needed someone that they could have a real conversation with. So that's what we try to do.
Bi-directional conversations mean bi-directional listening.
Listening, yes, both sides listening and both sides talking.
Right. I want to thank all of you for joining us and for this panel discussion, and just bringing to the audience some of the issues that are so important.
Yeah.
And I actually have a wonderful surprise now for all of us that's going to come on board. So I'm going to have everybody step out.
All right.
Okay.